Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Bill Hesser, our Director of Strategic Communications for the college. Um, Appreciate you all hopping in for the faculty and staff check-in this morning. At this point, I would like to turn things over to Dean Lang to make a few comments, and then we'll start taking some questions.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a little odd having conversations online, and I want to talk about that in a moment. I really want to start by thanking you all for taking the time out of your Monday, and I hope that you had good weekends, to join this college check-in for faculty and staff. This is the first of 3 check-ins that we'll be doing through the Dean's office this week. We have one for students later this week, and then even later this week, another one for our alumni leaders. I want to start by, there are a lot of things that I can say, and I'll start by just thanking you for all the work that you all have done, the really heavy lift that you all have helped our college and our Dean's office do in a very short period of time, and under some I suppose it would be an understatement to say, some very trying circumstances that none of us could have expected in a million years. This has indeed been, I think, a rough period, certainly since spring break, as we came into spring break. And I can list all the ways that it's been difficult. If we think about the impact that this shift to remote teaching and learning, this pandemic has had on our families, our friendship networks, our households, certainly the impact that it's had on how we work, the rhythms of work, how that's affected parenting, caregiving, relationships, whatever the case may be. I'll say personally, among the things that I would say that this pandemic and our response to it has disrupted has been I'll put it this way, the ability to walk through Sparks or Burroughs or Weaver or wherever my travels have taken me on campus and run into staff, run into faculty, run into colleagues, see students. That is something that I would say that I've missed the most, particularly as of course, a new dean who was very much enjoying the process of relationship building. Not that that's ended, but it certainly has been disruptive in that sense. And so as a consequence, we thought that it would be a good idea to find some way beyond the messaging that you've been receiving from me, which I hope has been frequent, clear, and consistent, but also to find a way to bring this college community together, albeit virtually, to just hear how you're doing, to hear some things that are on your mind, and as best as I possibly can under circumstances, field questions that you have. And so I want to be as forthright with you in response to questions that I'm sure that you all have in this moment of great uncertainty and anxiety. I'm going to be forthright, and I will be very honest in saying that's a good question. I'm not sure that we have a good answer just now, but we're waiting on guidance. So you may hear me say that, and I want you to take that not as a sign of me being coy or keeping things up my sleeve, but just a recognition of the fact that this is a very quickly evolving situation, and we're going to endeavor to keep you as informed as best we can, insofar as we are informed about things that are occurring. I'll stop there, but I want to, before I hand this over to Jenna Spinelli, who's a communications specialist for the McCourtney Institute for Democracy, and who very graciously agreed to moderate your comments and questions this morning. Thank you, Jenna. I want to acknowledge a couple of folks from the Dean's office who've joined me on this call, who have some subject area expertise and will assist me in some of the questions as they need to. And that is Scott Bennett, who is our college's Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies, Richard Page, our Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies, Avis Coons, who's Senior Assistant Dean of Outreach and Online Education and Director of the Filippelli Institute for E-Education and Outreach, and Amanda Gallo, who is our college's Human Resources Strategic Partner. And again, thank you all for taking the time to join this conversation. Jenna, thank you so much again for moderating. I'll hand this over to you temporarily.
All right, great. Well, thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance. We'll start with some of those. I'm sure there are more that will come up as we go through. There is a Q&A module at the bottom of your Zoom window. So if you want to type questions in there, I will take questions from there as we go through. You can consider, I will not be using anyone's names with their questions, so you can rest assured that you can submit them in confidence. Same thing with the questions that have come over email. So Clarence, I think the question that is on a lot of people's minds right now is, what does the university's financial situation look like moving forward? The last university-wide town hall, President Barron committed to completing the university's full payroll through the end of April, which is just 10 days away. We're starting to see other universities announce furloughs, salary reductions, those sorts of things. Can you share anything about what types of scenarios are being considered at Penn State or in the college, and also when we might receive more information about what the plan is going to be moving forward?
Good question, and not a surprise that that's foremost on people's minds. Here's what I can say. I mean, I think we do know that enrollments for the fall are pretty uncertain. Our state budget is uncertain. Our state appropriation is uncertain. And what all of that adds up to in terms of revenue is, again, not very clear. And so, you know, that is a fact in terms of the situation. But what I want to say is that, you know, we remain in the dean's office strongly committed to considering all the options that we can to limit the impact of this situation, this crisis, on our staff, on our faculty, and on our students. We still don't have, as of yet, a lot of guidance about what is to come. There is some good news here, though. Many of you may know that our university received $55 million in federal emergency relief funding. We were second to, I think, Arizona State, which received the most. So we did well, I would say, in this particular situation. We know that half of that will be going to financial aid grants to students, and the other half is going to be committed to costs associated with the changes associated with moving to remote learning, remote campus operations, if you will. And one thing that I took heart in is that in that particular release, this is Penn State News, this is not someone's comment, this is in writing, that there was a very specific commitment and pledge to use that $27.5 million of the $55 million that's coming to this university to support employees and to lessen the impact on the university workforce. So that to me is a very promising sign. I have heard no further conversation about salary reductions, furloughs, layoffs. I can't say, to be perfectly candid, that there may not be guidance that will include that. But I will say that we're committed to looking at all options, if it comes to that, to make sure that we can offset any of those kinds of deprivations. And I will also add that because we have not gotten any guidance to do otherwise, as a college, we are proceeding with business as normal. So in terms of processing contracts, new contracts, or what have you, for our teaching faculty, for our staff, so on and so forth, we are moving forward. And I'm taking that as a signal that we're going to continue to do the work of the college until we are explicitly instructed that we need to consider doing some other things. And then at that point, I have a conversation with my team in the dean's office. I have a conversation with my heads and directors who need to be in the loop on this. And again, our commitment is to make sure that we do whatever we can to offset the impact of this particular moment and to make sure that any sacrifices, if you will, that have to be made, that these are shared across the board, and that, if you will, our most vulnerable, I'll use that word for the sake of conversation, populations and constituencies are not disproportionately affected, but that everyone has skin in the game.
Right. So I want to follow up on some of those specifics regarding fixed term contracts and those sorts of things. We received several questions about those.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, is there anything that departments or units should be doing or thinking about right now to put themselves in a good position given the financial uncertainty right now?
Well, this is very good. I mean, so as you all know, there's a hiring freeze. And except by exceptions granted directly from the provost's office. And, you know, I know that that's been a source of some consternation and concern. It's a source of consternation for us because we have to collect all these things, we have to process them, make decisions, and then send them to the provost's office, and then I have to wait and see what the provost's office response will be. So I'm in some ways in the middle of a process that goes to Old Main. And here's the good thing I think about putting a pause, if you will, or a freeze on new hires, right? Is that it gives us the opportunity to make sure that the faculty, the instructors, the staff that we have now are fully deployed and engaged. And so I would say, if there's anything that our units can be doing, is really to think about all of the various things that any individual can do within their portfolio. So for example, I don't know that this will be the case, but I'll just give you one concrete example, maybe to my detriment, you know, in terms of if we have a problem, for example, with enrollment, just as a possibility. That does not necessarily mean, that could mean, for example, that we might have teaching faculty whose activities might shift to thinking about curriculum in other ways, right? So if departments can think about multiple kinds of things that people can do, I think that's a very good preparation for us, if we need to, having conversations about how work gets done and how people, if you will, are deployed. And maybe that's not clear enough, but I'm saying let's think flexibly about all the things that people can do that would make sense in their job classification and portfolio. You know, this might be a good one, not to put Amanda on the spot, but I know that we've had some conversation about this with our heads and directors in our weekly meetings. Amanda, I just want to make sure, is there anything that you want to add to that? You don't have to if you have nothing to add, but wanted to give you that opportunity.
Sure. No, I think, Clarence, you did an excellent job of explaining. Really, there's a number of different creative solutions, I think, that will be available, and that, you know, should we get to a point where we need to consider how else to redeploy our faculty and staff, or how to ensure that our faculty and staff are fully utilized and engaged, that we'll be able to do that. So really, you know, right now, what we would suggest, I think, for departments and centers and institutes to be doing is looking around, thinking about the work that's out there that you don't normally get to during a regular busy semester. You know, that's the type of thing that we should be making a list of. You know, what will make us better so that when we're back to full steam, we can, you know, say, look how we utilize this time and utilized the individuals we had available to accomplish that type of work. So I think that's really what the dean is getting at and what we would encourage at this point from a people perspective.
Great. Amanda, you might want to stay on for these next two. There were some questions specifically around fixed term faculty and staff contracts that end June 30th. How will those be handled? Is there any reason to think at this point that those might not be renewed for the next fiscal year?
Let me speak to that, and Amanda can follow up. Sorry to interrupt you, Jenna.
No, it's okay.
Again, we're proceeding business as usual in terms of how those will go. And again, this is a rapidly evolving situation, but as I sit in front of you right now at this moment, today, our intention is to continue business as it has been done. So I just want to start there. Amanda, if you want to pipe in, that's perfectly fine too.
Nope, we are moving ahead with the typical timeline. So change on our end.
Was that just me, or did Amanda break up a little bit?
Yeah, I think I heard her break up there too, but I think I heard her say everything's moving along, business as usual, just as you were saying before,
Yeah.
Clarence. So a question came in about travel.
You're all
Sorry.
Go ahead, Amanda. You know, the technology is beautiful when it works.
Yeah, and you know, folks that have multiple people at home fighting over internet, kids doing online school, all of that. I've heard of houses that have 3 or 4 Zooms running simultaneously.
Exactly,
So.
exactly, yeah.
So we had a question come in about travel budgets. You know, many conferences and events from the spring and now into the first part of the summer are being canceled and rescheduled. Will faculty travel money from this year carry over to next year? And I suspect that that might also hold true for, you know, organizations that were bringing guest speakers or those types of things to campus or had planned to do so.
Well, you know, so to be honest with you, we've not had that conversation just yet. We definitely, I mean, we have to make sure that we protect the mission of our college in terms of supporting faculty research and research activities. You know, that would be something that I would want to have consultation with our financial officer. And of course, let me say this, I mean, the goal would be to hold our faculty harmless in these situations. Certainly, we're not taking people's research monies or what have you. And so I think that that's something that we will easily figure out how to make sure that people get, you know, that the activities that may have been delayed, that we as a college are supporting them and continuing those. I do want to add to this though. I mean, I do think, and this is why I had to grin a little bit ruefully earlier in terms of how the technology works. When it works, it's marvelous. And we had a really good example of this just last week. We had a teaching faculty promotion workshop. And, you know, of course, this particular ladder of teaching faculty has not existed for an entirely long time. But in reference to the previous session, we had an amazing turnout, a larger turnout than we could have fit in 124 Sparks. I say that to say this, that I hope on the other side of this, we can think about how we use our technology so that maybe all of the guests that we bring to campus, we may not have to, but that we use our equipment, we'll use the technology in some effective ways to continue to buttress our research profile and activities, but doing it in ways where we're not dealing with travel, we're not dealing with lodging, we're not dealing with per diem. And I might add, from the standpoint of sustainability, we're not dealing with events where we have to sort out garbage, so on and so forth afterwards. So I think that there's some ways that we can function differently. And this is not to say that people won't be able to travel, we won't do that, or we won't bring in guests. I'm not saying that at all, but that I think that this can also be a moment to think about how we use the technology effectively.
Right, for sure. Question here about the tenure clock. This goes a little over my head, so I'm just going to read it from my phone, pardon me. I'm a faculty member concerned about the possibility that a tightened budget may affect hiring, considering whether to take the 1-year tenure clock extension, but am concerned about the cancellation of my tenure line in a budget restriction. Any advice?
Okay. So let's put it this way. I mean, I think that we still have some sorting out to do in terms of hires. I mean, let's be clear. We'll have to take a close look at that. In part because I'm really committed to thinking about how we take care of the people that we already have here, right? Which does not exclude further recruitment, but it means that we might have to take a hard look at it. And we might have to have a very dramatically reduced approval of hires. I think that that's one of the realities that we have to look at. There's no getting around that. And one of the conversations that the heads and directors and the dean's office team have been beginning to have is, do we in this environment think about putting a stronger accent on retentions? We do hires where we have to, where we can, but perhaps a better focus of concentrating our efforts is on keeping our stellar faculty. I'm not quite sure that I'm getting how that has an impact on someone taking an extension in their probationary period. That part I'm not exactly clear about. Certainly, I think that the fact that that decision was made at the university level with really good intervention from our faculty senate is really important. I hope that that lessens the anxiety, certainly that our pre-tenure faculty may have had about how this crisis affects their career progression and trajectory. But I'm not quite sure that I'm getting exactly how that meshes together. Let me do this, because maybe I might sort of, Scott, can I perhaps put you on the spot a little bit? I mean, this is not strictly in your bailiwick, but I know you deal with research related activities. Is this something that you want to take a crack at in case I've missed maybe the core of the question here?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think our pre-tenure faculty are one of our high priorities. And the reason the university extended the year clock for those who need it is to allow us to complete the research that everybody needs to get tenure and to move up. So there's been no suggestion that we are going to not renew contracts, for instance, for tenure line faculty during the pre-tenure period. There's been no suggestion about that. I would encourage anybody that needs it in terms of completing their research to take that extra year. The university set that as a policy in order to help people succeed. We've always been a university and a college that wants to tenure everybody who is ready to be tenured. We don't have quotas. We're not looking or anticipating that one will come into play. So I would be reassured that that is one of our high priorities.
Scott, thank you for that. Okay, so that was what the core of the question was. No, so take it as a good sign that I was confused by the question, because that's not anything that's on my radar that we would even consider doing. And we had that conversation with our teaching faculty about this as well. Anyone who merits promotion and tenure will get promotion and tenure and all of the things that come with that. We are a research university, and we definitely, I'm serious, and the dean's office team is very serious about safeguarding, that aspect of our mission as a university and as a college.
Great. Amanda, question here for you. Do you know if HR is currently considering expanding the vacation donation program in anticipation of helping those who may be furloughed, laid off, et cetera, in the coming weeks and months?
So that is not something that we've been seeing at this point. What the university assist individuals is to provide through April 30th the COVID-19 paid time off, an effort to ensure up through the end of this month at a minimum that individuals will have what exactly can look like to there could be keeping everyone full.
Yeah, Amanda, you're breaking up again. I don't know if you want to maybe try turning your video off and then just restating that from the beginning.
I was going to suggest
Sure. Does this work? Can you hear me any better now?
Yeah, you're still breaking up. We also had suggested that maybe you should enter, like leave and come back in, so we can come back to this question whenever I see you pop back in.
Okay.
And by the way, this never happens to Amanda, at least in meetings that I've been on. So
Yeah, and there's been some comments in the Q&A about how these are the issues that instructors deal with regularly as we all kind of navigate this remote learning world. And that kind of brings us to another big theme of the question, and that's what is the fall semester going to look like? Again, can you share anything about the discussions around online or not, or maybe some alternative strategies like delaying the start of the semester, moving to a quarter system? Again, all these things that we're seeing other universities come forward and say that they're going to be trying out.
So I'm going to let Richard, and if she wants it, also Avis, speak to that a little bit, but let me sort of say something in broad strokes, and the two of them, if they want, can maybe speak at a, take a deeper dive. The fact of the matter is that fall 2020 might as well be 20 years from now. I have no idea, what that is going to look like. And there's no guidance because I'm not sure that there's clarity at the top. We know, for example, right now we have a stay-at-home order. And so even if we move beyond the university, there are certain directives and mandates that have come from the state. I would say that it's probably good for people as best they can to think about what remote or online education would look like for the fall. But it's very difficult for me to speak in any definitive manner. Even if we were to move in a direction of returning to campus for the fall, there are a whole lot of things that would have to be sorted out around that. I would be very surprised. And again, I have no facts or evidence on this. And so you all take what I'm saying very carefully and in that spirit. I think we would have to stage a return. I don't think we could just bring everyone back. And so there would probably have to be a conversation about who might continue to work remotely for a little bit and who would come back on campus. And there would be a lot of things related to that. We'd have to have conversations about, who has certain kinds of pre-existing conditions that we might have to think and talk about. And again, this is just me blue skying, right? But we don't have any clarity about that right now. And I do want to say, and I hope that this doesn't come off as an excuse. I think there's truth to this. Penn State is a pretty particular kind of a beast. So we don't just have University Park. We have 20 odd, Commonwealth campuses. And so if Penn State is not moving perhaps as quickly as some institutions in terms of landing on certain kinds of solutions, I think we have to factor the size of and complexity of this institution into that there are a lot of moving parts that have to be coordinated, I think, to make a move. And I do want to say, I share many of the frustrations that I think many of you have about the flow of information and how timely that is. But I would say that our administration has done as good a job as could be done under these circumstances at an institution this size around making these kinds of key decisions about how we deliver our courses and how we work. I said that I would yield to Richard and Avis if either or both of them would like to speak. Richard, anything to add?
Yeah, I have a couple of things. So let me get my video on here. So first, with regard to what Clarence said about taking a while, one thing I think that isn't very clear, but I think it's important to realize is that one reason that there was a delay until Thursday for announcing that classes this summer would be either done remotely or online is that the impact on student aid had to be sorted out, and adjustments to tuition had to be sorted out, which required Board of Trustees approval. So some of this was being driven really out of the concern for making sure that our students did not suffer any kind of harm by too rashly going online. With regard to the fall, I mean, I can just echo what Clarence has said. I think there's uncertainty about fall. I mean, we're all, you know, living in this environment, just speaking for myself, in some ways it's hard to imagine that things would, you know, it's hard to imagine how in the world we could be back to normal, so to speak, in the fall. The provost said at the Academic Leadership Forum on Thursday that a decision will be made at least 6 weeks before the start of the fall semester. One thing I can tell you is that if we aren't having in-person classes, the decision about how to deliver a particular class will be made based on what makes the most sense for the resources that are available, what makes the most sense pedagogically for that course. So in other words, the instructor in the department can decide whether or not it's best to deliver the course remotely, like we're currently doing this semester, or to offer it online asynchronously, as is commonly done on World Campus. So that decision can be made on a course-by-course basis. I've heard really zero talk about moving to a quarter system. Frankly, it's hard for me. To me, that sounds like a really big lift. Completely changing the academic calendar like that, changing the structure of courses. I've heard no mention of that, so I think that's highly unlikely.
Yeah.
So that's really. So I think we just have to wait and see, and hopefully by midsummer we'll know for certain what this fall will look like.
So question here, Scott, you may be the best poised to
Jenna,
answer. Yeah,
Jenna,
sure.
not to interrupt you, just 1 second. I just want to make sure that Avis
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
can
please.
add that she could, so she may have ideas
Sure.
about maybe how people might think about
Sure.
preparing for remote or online teaching options. Just want to
Well-
make sure you have that opportunity, Avis.
Yeah, here I am in front of the library. So I think the reassuring thing about fall is, despite the fact that we have no idea what's happening for fall, there's a lot of planning for different contingencies. And I think it's probably premature to talk about them, but I think the university also has a lot of resources to put in to try to make potentially remote or whatever happens with fall, whatever that is. I think the university is coming up with some really creative solutions to try to minimize any negative impacts from that.
Great.
Thanks, Avis.
So Scott, a question here that may be best suited for you regarding faculty who do research or work outside the US, maybe have materials in archives or libraries abroad, or even working with human subjects abroad. How would you advise or encourage faculty to move forward in this situation, particularly those who are thinking about making tenure and those sorts of things?
Yeah, so I think there's maybe a couple of parts of this question. Is what does the delay in international research, human subjects research, and so on mean for promotion and tenure and our normal progress? And the second thing is just how do we deal with it? First thing to say on all of this is we are just subject to national and international guidance on this. We can't relax restrictions, and so we're sort of coping the best we can with the fact that people can't get where they need to be. And this involves dig sites, it involves archives, it involves interviewing face-to-face. Everyone is in that same boat, and everyone is in that same boat nationally. It's frustrating that we're all in that same boat, but that in terms of promotion and tenure, that's part of why we extended the tenure clock by a year. We understand that research is going to be slowed down in some areas, probably more than others, because of this. So I think we're all sensitive to that. In terms of how we deal with it, there's not a great answer other than to be creative. Can you talk with colleagues internationally? Can you reorder your research? So write up one publication now and save the archival work for a little bit later. Is there technology that we can use to investigate manuscripts and so on, as opposed to travel? If everything is delayed a year, that's a year in the life of our faculty, and that's really frustrating. I understand that, but we also we know that that's there. And so to the dean's point about trying to hold faculty harmless for things that are out of their hands, again, administratively, we understand that. I don't think there's a one size fits all for how do we deal with the research frustrations that we're having. Can we go to a Qualtrics survey rather than face-to-face? Maybe. We know it's perhaps not as optimal, but let's do the best we can and put all the caveats that we need in our research write-ups until we get back to whatever the new normal looks like.
Can I add to that too? I mean, I think that, you know, there's the issue of those who are pre-tenure, and then there's the issue of those who may have sabbaticals in front of them. And so just to echo the same theme, you know, there's a process now where if you have a COVID-19 related reason, if you will, for why you can't take your sabbatical, you can trust that this office is going to support that request. And I think it will be viewed favorably at the provost's office as well, where these things ultimately are approved or not. And so at the provost level, they're aware of this too. So definitely there's awareness in a college, but also as we move up the chain, if you will, in a university, there's a great deal of sensitivity to that.
In addition, for foundations and grant agencies, more and more there's a recognition that research has been disrupted. And so we're encouraging all of our funded researchers to look for getting a supplement to enable your work to get done when it is possible. We've gotten some federal guidance on this, for instance, but there is hopefully more coming so that there's some uniformity in what can happen. But looking for ways to stretch that funding to when you can actually do the work is one of the small things that we can do.
Great. Amanda, I see you're back on. So if you wouldn't mind, the question we had before about the vacation donation policy, and then there was another one that came in regarding any information on whether or when the university will open daycares, preschools, camps, those types of things.
Okay, so is that any better? Okay, so let me know, give me a big wave if you lose me. So related to the vacation donation, there's been no conversation about changing the purpose of that program or extending it more broadly related to COVID time off. However, you know, one of the things I wanted to make a point about was that the university has through April 30th provided the new time off options. So no benefits eligible employee is currently using their own time if they're unable to work for illness, for care for family, if work is not available. All of that time is being charged to a separate group of time under those 3 new COVID codes that were entered into Workday. So potentially more to come related to vacation donation, but at this time it stands for catastrophic illness, typically is what that's used for. The second question, Jenna, was related to
daycares, preschools, camps.
Yep, so nothing at this point. Some of the summer camps have been canceled. If you're reading Penn State Today, you'll have seen that. The daycares remain closed, or at least those under university purview. And basically at this point, the governor's orders will continue to drive how those function and you know, continue to remain closed. So only more to come once we see how things shape up in the coming weeks.
Yeah. And while you're still here, Amanda, I think we kind of touched on this briefly earlier, but I think it just bears repeating specifically. Is there any idea of when staff will be able to return to campus?
No, so the university date right now is May 8th. So we are anticipated to be working from home at least through May 8th. And then again, governor's orders, how things progress with, you know, COVID and getting folks able to be reintroduced to society will depend. And I think I briefly heard the dean talk about, you know, anticipating some sort of gradual return to the workplace. So at this point, plan to be home at least through May 8th and more to come.
Okay, great. Question here about students who don't have laptops and are struggling through this remote learning period on their smartphones, which, as you can imagine, can be difficult for writing assignments or other things that require data usage, access, things like that. what if anything is the college doing to help students gain access to the materials that they need, and how might that continue to change or evolve if we do find ourselves in a longer period of remote learning?
So it seems like there are a couple of parts to that question. So if we're talking about hardware, that obviously is a bigger lift. I know that, you know, particularly for graduate students, we had some contingencies to support a limited number of them with laptops. I mean, Scott can speak to this, but, you know, part of the issue is that our stockpile, if you will, of laptops was not a big one. And so we're having some conversations about some policies where we can find ways to grow that stockpile. I think that, you know, speaking more broadly in terms of resources for students, I think a good place for them, and in my communications, particularly with undergrads, Scott can say more about graduate students. You know, we have a website, remotelearning.psu.edu, that folks can go to, where there are some college resources, or there may be another website that we've created. Is escaping me now, and apologies for that. But I do want to give you all some good feedback, not to deflect the question, but we recently did a survey that was aimed at our undergraduates about their thoughts about remote learning. We had about 200 students who responded, and the feedback was actually very positive, that people feel like they can get to their classes. Students feel like they know how to get in touch with their advisors. Their advisors are accessible. They feel like that the communications on the part of the college have been clear and consistent. And so, as difficult as this has been, I have been encouraged by the adaptability of our students, clearly the good job that our instructors have done, and I think how our college has pivoted really well. That doesn't really answer the question, but I think it reframes it in a sense that, yes, students are having difficulty, but as far as we can tell from some survey data, which of course could be biased by those who are able to do it, that we've had some really good feedback along those lines. And I can talk more about that, but I don't want to eat up too much more space about that. Scott, did you want to say a little bit more about hardware aspect of this?
Yes, for students, what the university is asking them to do is email or put in a help desk request to the Central University IT help desk. The university has mailed out multiple hundreds of computers to students, graduate students and undergraduates. They're taking computers out of labs, for instance, boxing them up and sending them to students who don't have another way to access what they need to. So look for the Central IT Help Desk, or go on the College of Liberal Arts webpage and go to IT support, enter a help desk request. The university is handling all of those centrally. And so, for instance, they've recently sent out guidance if students got computers for the spring semester, they have new forms, how you can extend that through the summer. So centrally, university is handling it at that level.
Jenna, do you think it might be good for Richard to speak to that? I mean, this does kind of come into his portfolio. I just want to make sure.
I can follow up on that. So just to be clear, yeah, undergrads can also get, you know, if they have technology needs, it's also possible for them to get the required or the needed technology. There's a team, as you probably know, there are 12 transition teams that are looking at different aspects of the transition to remote, and they will continue to do so as long as we stay in a remote or online environment. And one of the team's task is really just to communicate clearly to students what the technology requirements are, and to provide students truly in need with technology that's required for them to do their work. So the university is looking into that. I mean, I'm not on that team, so don't know any details about how that's being rolled out, but that's definitely something the university is concerned about, and it's a need that the university is trying to meet.
We had a comment come in about teaching faculty that are teaching large classes and kind of the diminished role that teaching assistants are taking on in this remote period. Answering emails can easily take up a good chunk of your day if you have several hundred students in your class. So just, wondering if anyone has advice for faculty that are teaching those large classes, or there's also a suggestion that maybe some type of more dedicated support for these teaching faculty might be beneficial.
Others might want to speak to this, but I'll say this. I mean, it's good, I think, to, I would say communicate that to the head of the unit. These are the kinds of scenarios that I think are helpful to have float up, if you will, find their way to the dean's office. And listen, we know that there's more troubleshooting that we have to do. This was a very quick pivot to remote teaching and learning. And certainly if this is going to continue, or to the extent that it will continue, there's some things that we want to figure out. And so I would welcome the opportunity to think about how we might be able to better assist our teaching faculty, who do a great share of teaching, obviously, for the college. So that's not really an answer. We do have a website that I hope has some helpful resources, perhaps not on that question, but more generally. And for the life of me, I'm not remembering the name of that site. I apologize. I'll have to put that out in a subsequent message or what have you. So my short answer to that, and others can speak to it if they want to or feel like they have something to add, is let's make sure that that's being recorded, that that's being lodged, make sure that that finds its way into conversations about the annual review, so that these things become visible, so that we in the dean's office know about that and can think about ways to offset that.
Great. Did anyone else want to weigh in on that before we move to the next question? Okay. Scott, this should be a quick one for you. Any sense of when the IRB will be accepting new applications?
I have no particular information about IRB, and I will look into that and try to get needed guidance out to any of our researchers that's affecting. Great.
We've had two questions about enrollment come in. One, Dean Lang, I think you start to touch on about what do we know about what the incoming class of 2020 will look like? And then on the other side of that, sometimes economic hardships force students or encourage students to stay in school or go back to school for graduate programs, that type of thing. Is the college considering any of those scenarios with regard to enrollment planning for the coming year?
Yeah, this again, I mean, I think that there are a couple of us who can speak to this. Richard can have something to say, I would imagine, certainly Scott too. So, here again, we can only make predictions in terms of what our enrollments in the fall are going to be. The crucial factor here, obviously, are international students. And there are international travel restrictions. And so I think we can safely assume, unless we figure out something in terms of remote or some kind of remote or online opportunities for international students, which are not straightforward because those have to go through the ministries of education in these respective of nations, where we can safely predict that we will not be seeing new international students in the fall, which will certainly have an impact on enrollments. As it relates to, well, one other option that has been discussed, I don't know if there are any firm decisions on this yet, but to the point about economic hardships, there may be coming down the pike or over the transom, whatever term you want to use, some options for students who are at University Park who might want to temporarily transfer to other Commonwealth campuses closer to home to maybe be able to do so for the sake of saving some expenses. I'm happy to let Richard and Scott weigh in on that, on that as well in terms of undergraduate in graduate student enrollments. Of course, graduate enrollments, the dynamics are quite different with that. And I think we will see more students going that route.
I would just add one thing that's a positive data point, I think, is that as of last Monday, our overall paid accept, so these are the students who have paid money saying, yes, I want to come to Penn State, is up 37% versus this time last year. Now, that doesn't mean that they'll come necessarily, but still, you know, if we were under normal circumstances, my concern would be at this point that we would have too many students, incoming students. But as Clarence pointed out, there's so many variables. One variable is that the incoming students, even if they're accepting University Park, might also be given the opportunity to start their first year at the campus closer to home, or maybe even the World Campus. I don't think any final decisions have been made on that, but there's been talk about that. So it's really hard to predict how many people will actually be enrolled in our incoming class in particular, but also just what our overall enrollments will look like in the fall.
Before Scott talks, can I put a finer point on what Richard said? Richard, thank you for that reminder. I mean, definitely the paid accepts are up. The thing that we're still holding our breath about, I won't speak for Richard, I'll speak for myself, is, you know, the potential for melt, right? I think is the thing that we're still remaining cautiously optimistic about, that we won't have so much of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to make that point, that the paid accepts are up, but the question of melt, because we're in such unusual circumstances, we don't have a crystal ball on that one, so.
Just in terms of graduate students, we have a couple of departments that are very heavily international, and we continue to be uncertain about whether any international students will be able to matriculate in the fall, new international students, because consulates are closed and visa processing is not happening. Apart from the international students, on the domestic front, our numbers college-wide look relatively steady in terms of incoming graduate program size. They've been on track largely with what we've projected.
Richard, just a follow-up. Did you say that paid accepts were up 37% compared to last year? So
That's correct.
That they heard you right. Okay.
Point of time, yeah, which is frankly amazing, because most places, you know, are saying they'll accept things, paid accepts past May 1. And Clarence is exactly right. I mean, this is, you know, these are uncharted waters. So there's always melt. You know, whether there'll be more melt than normal this year, you know, it's hard to say. Maybe there very well could be more melt, but there's also the argument that, you know, in uncertain times, if people can afford it, they're going to go to school. You know, they're not going to take a gap year, because what are they going to do? You know, so it's really hard to predict.
Right. Kind of related to that, regarding enrollments, can anyone speak to how the university is interacting with state college officials to help mitigate potential economic impact on businesses, downtown, that sort of thing?
So I'll speak to that. And I think I can safely say that those considerations are above the pay grade of any of us who are on this call. I will say this, though, based on my indications, and I want to be obviously very careful about how I speak for the president, which I'm not empowered or have the authority to do. But I do know that President Barron is very, very sensitive about protecting as much as he possibly can the Penn State workforce, because, for example, many of you who are following local events know that there have been furloughs for county employees. And so in terms of the math that he's doing about how much of that could we as a community, State College and Penn State, be able to absorb, he's very much thinking about how we do all we can at Penn State to make sure that we lessen the impact of this crisis on our workforce, because we are part of a bigger organism, ecosystem, if you will. So that announcement has been driving a lot of his concerns and conversations. I think I can say that safely as well. So that's at the back of his mind in terms of thinking about how we navigate the situation here at our university.
Great. We have about 5 minutes left. A couple of follow-up items here. We'll try to get through them pretty quickly. Amanda, some folks were surprised to hear the May 8th date as the latest guidance about when staff might be able to return to campus, given the news, I believe, this morning that large groups were suspended until June 19th. Is it possible that the remote work date could also be extended through June 19th?
Absolutely, yes. The May 8th date is just the most recently published announced date. So I think we will continue to see that change if circumstances dictate.
Okay. Scott, we're talking about promotion and tenure earlier and some of the adjustments that have been made for folks going through tenure this year. Has there been any discussions about extending those accommodations for folks up for promotion and tenure next year?
Well, my understanding of the promotion and tenure extensions is that faculty can invoke those at any time up until essentially right before they go up. So a faculty member doesn't have to decide today that they want to go up or not go up in 3 years. So there's a good bit of flexibility there. We want to encourage our faculty to go up for tenure when they're ready and to go up for promotion when they're ready. The same is true of our graduate students. We've extended funding for our graduate students by a year if they need it. But if students are ready to graduate and get on the job market, we want them to do that. But these are decisions that don't have to be made right now for something that might be happening well down the line.
Great.
Let me add to that, if I may. I mean, I think that I know that our heads and directors are thinking a lot about this matter, and I don't make any presumptions about whoever posed the question. But you should make sure, you know, if you're a pre-tenure faculty member, that you're talking to your head, who really, I can say across the board, want to make sure that they're supporting you. So it's your decision, right? But make sure that you're taking consultation with your department or head or you know, director.
Great. And then Abbas, this one might be best suited for you. There was a question that came in about the potential implications of World Campus in enrollment changes and how the college is thinking about those potential impacts.
Well, we're always thinking about World Campus enrollments, and we track those carefully. So I think there are a couple different levels of this answer, and I probably only have time to get into a little bit of it, but overall enrollments in our programs and courses in the World Campus is holding steady for summer. We haven't done year-to-date assessments for the fall yet. For specific programs, we're probably going to see some drop off in the short term related to the macro issues in the economy that are impacting everybody. I think that we'll return to a more normal state when people are able to finance their education, but I do expect temporarily there's going to be a little bit of drop off. I'm not expecting it to be catastrophic.
Right. And last question here. So, you know, whenever we return to campus, and it's been clear from the past hour that is far from certain at this point, but whenever that does happen, what are some steps that the university and the college are taking to ensure that working conditions will be safe for faculty, staff, students, everyone that is in our facilities?
So I can only at this point speak to principles and commitment. That I definitely would want to make sure that we have those conversations, and, you know, permit me to personalize this just a tad. And I have my wife's permission to say this, you know, but because we've had these conversations, she's a person with diabetes. And so this question of making sure, you know, which puts her at a very particular risk for this particular virus, And so, so for a whole host of reasons, personally and otherwise, I want to make sure that we're very intentional in those conversations. And I think I can safely say that our provost and president will be intentional about those kinds of considerations as well. What that process looks like, how we gauge and respond to that is of course open-ended, but I feel comfortable in saying that that will certainly be something that will have some vigorous conversation, which is in part why I predict that we will be talking about some kind of a staged return so that we can make sure that we're vetting these things and to be intentional so that we're bringing everyone back into the safest, healthiest environment as we're able to manage and determine. Yeah. Jenna, I'm bad at this, but I know you're moderating. Can I take the prerogative to say something very quickly?
Oh,
and
sure.
I'm happy to let you do what you need to do to wrap up. And
Sure.
so thank you again for moderating. I really appreciate you agreeing to do this. I just want to thank you all for the work that you're doing. I want to say that I can appreciate all of the concerns that you have in a situation that is just evolving and is open-ended and with so many contingencies. And you all have just done a fantastic job. We're getting feedback, very positive feedback from our students about that, which is really important. Thank you all for, at the department and unit level, the mutual aid work that you all are doing to support each other. We have faculty who are doing really good work in the community around this particular crisis. My thanks to them as well. We've got faculty who are pivoting and doing some really important research on different aspects of this particular crisis. And then last but not least, we're still figuring things out. Things are still open-ended, but I want you all to trust, even if you don't know anything about me, we've got a fabulous team of folks in the dean's office who are accessible on Sundays, evenings, who are always messaging, always willing to be helpful, who are wanting to think through with me and with others how we move forward. Your heads and directors have been doing a great job, have been trying to, trust me, they are sharing your concerns with me. We're having conversations about that. So we are really demonstrating who we are as a liberal arts community in terms of being problem solvers, being creative, being, if you will, citizens in the broadest, most democratic and expansive meaning of that term. So again, things are open-ended, but I couldn't ask for a better group of people to be in this madness alongside of. And so I just want to make sure that that gets said. And if I can't reassure you of anything else, we've got great folks on the case, so to speak. And I'll shut up now.
Indeed. Well, great. So there were a few questions we did not have time to get to, but we do have them all cataloged in the Q&A, and Bill and Kevin and the team can work on getting those out to the person most appropriate to answer them. But otherwise, I think I'm good. If you are, Bill, Kevin, anything else before we wrap up?
Nope, I think, thank you everybody for your questions and for participating. Thank you to Jenna for moderating, and thank you to Dean Lang and everybody else who was able to answer the questions.
All right,
Bill,
thanks
Kevin,
everybody.
Mark, Dave, Kathy, thank all of you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, enjoy the rest of your day.